everybody always thinks of severe weather with Oklahoma. It's synonymous with Oklahoma, but the winter weather is actually a harder forecast for us because Oklahoma is usually on that fine line of if we're going to get, all rain, maybe some rain and some sleet or some ice or maybe all ice.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tinker Talks. This is an audio format podcast that covers everything that happens behind the fence line of Tinker Air Force Base. Today we are talking about a subject near and dear to the hearts of many Oklahomans, and that is weather. This state is famous and actually infamous for its weather, and today we are talking to Captain Johnny Martin of the Operations Support Squadron Weather Office, and we're going to talk about military weather and it's important to the mission. So, sir, good morning and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Now, do we call you Captain Martin or Jetstream?
Apparently, yeah, Jetstream is what some people are calling.
All right.
Yeah, either works, I guess.
Seems very fitting. So, before we get into today's topic and conversation, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of give us the brief 200-word or less background about who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, so I'm captain in the Air Force, as you mentioned. I've been in about 8 years now. Actually, 8 years this week is the anniversary of my commissioning. Thank you. Yeah, so commissioned out of Purdue University in Indiana. That's where I'm originally from, and studied atmospheric science there. So pretty convenient. Then I went in as a weather officer. I've had a couple duty stations before this. Started out at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base at Tucson under the 25th Operational Weather Squadron. And then I was there for a couple years and then went out to Vandenberg Air Force Base in California from there to the 30th Operations Support Squadron. A little different than our OSS here because the mission out there with Space Command was dealing with space launches. So I actually forecasted for a lot of the space launches out of there, as well as the Minuteman III ballistic missile test launches as well out of Vandenberg. And then came here to Tinker in April of 2017. So been here a little over 2 years now, 2.5 years, and just loving it, being in the kind of the center and the focal point of weather for the U.S. and severe weather, what everybody thinks of in Tornado Alley.
And we're going to touch on that here in a little bit because I think probably a lot of people find that pretty fascinating and interesting. But so what did get you interested in, you went to Purdue and graduated, obviously the atmospheric science degree lends itself to this, but why the military and what got you interested in, is it meteorology? Is that the same thing?
It is. It kind of goes, it's synonymous with atmospheric science and meteorology. So I knew I always wanted to serve in the military. My family's had a long history of serving the military. I had a grandfather who flew B-17s in World War II in the European theater.
Awesome.
My brother and sister are actually in the military as well. My brother's a Marine pilot. My sister's in the Navy on submarines. And I knew I wanted to do weather too, so I did my research and I wanted to be a weather forecaster. And I saw that the Air Force is really the only branch that has such a robust career field for weather officers and forecasting, and we can go pretty much anywhere in the Air Force because weather is always going to impact installations, and we actually do Army weather support as well. So the Army outsources to the Air Force for their weather support as well.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. I did not know that. Is it more of a robust career field than even the Navy, I guess?
It is. So the Navy deals a lot more with oceanography, of course, with wave heights, that sort of thing, and they will have some weather officers as well as enlisted on their larger ships, like their carriers, that sort of thing.
Right.
But it's definitely a little more focused and a little more smaller career field than what we have for the Air Force, where, like I said, we can go really anywhere in the world.
Right. That's amazing. So you go to Purdue, you decide to join the Air Force. What's training like? You already have this degree, so you're pretty well versed in this career field. What's training like in the Air Force?
The Air Force is really putting so the degree we get out of college is a lot of the science and background and everything, but the Air Force, what the training is so good about in the Air Force is actually applying it and actually using all that background to an operational setting.
Right. And
a lot of times that means, translating what we know from a science background to the end users, be it, pilots or, like I said, for space launches, whatever that installation's mission is. And so being able to communicate what those, what the weather impacts are, and actually putting your science to use and putting it to, an operational use at the, the tactical and operational level.
Right. Is it a long school?
It's about 2.5 months down at Keesler, the weather officer course. Yeah, for newly commissioned lieutenants, and like I said, it's pretty much you come in and they know that you have the background, a lot of the thermodynamics, dynamic background as well, and differential equations, a lot of the big complicated math. So they move
just
on.
That
to the
term, actually, you just lost me.
it can be a handful in college. So it's nice when you get to the weather officer course and actually applying those concepts and
that's awesome.
to the Air Force.
And Keesler is a pretty good place to go to school for weather. I actually had an opportunity to go to Keesler for a school down there as well, and it's of course you had to. There were still signs of the hurricane and it flooded half of the front end of the base there, but so it seems like that's probably a pretty good area to
it
deal
is
with.
And a lot of the civilians down there are still, the instructors have lived through Katrina back in 2005. Actually a good friend of mine, he's an IMA now, he's a weather major. He was actually in charge of the weather schoolhouse when that all happened.
Wow.
And it was scary times just hearing his stories about it, with just not knowing, just kind of the fog of war, what, if you had to send people back home or not, or, what to do with the people that are TDY there.
Right.
And people trying just to figure out if they had a home to go back to.
Well, and pretty critical for what you do, not just the flying and launching aircraft and what they're going to be deal with, but just the safety in general.
Puts it all in perspective. Yeah, it definitely
no doubt.
does, especially with what's happened to Tyndall lately.
Oh,
and Offutt with the flooding.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure is. And so you talk about space a little bit, and not to get too far off topic, but is there weather outside of the atmosphere? Like, is that possible? Like, is there weather in space?
Not what we think of for an atmosphere.
Right. No wind gusts or anything?
So I kind of break it down to terrestrial weather, being what we think of here, thunderstorms, that sort of thing,
right.
Snow, rain, precipitation. But when you hear the term space weather, it's usually only dealing with radiation, those sort of things from the sun. So you hear like geomagnetic storming and solar flares. That's what we call space weather, but it's not really weather with what you and I usually think about with it.
Right.
And it's not typically so when you hear atmospheric science, that's all my degree, it's pretty much dealing with just the atmosphere here on Earth.
Right. What the stuff we deal with. Awesome. So Weather Flight Commander, that is your position, and it's a big title to bear. So how much of your job involves collaborating and communicating with other flights, such as the airfield ops and airfield management?
A lot of it does, and it's really nice that we have, AM ops, airfield management operations, and as well as the ATC, the air traffic control. That's all rolled into one flight, the airfield operations flight, into our squadron with us. So we do a lot of coordination with them, especially this time of year, getting into the winter weather. They need to know how what we're going to be seeing in terms of winter precipitation. If we get ice or snow on the airfield, because that's a primary. The primary means of our mission. So we need to make sure that they know what we're going to be expecting, and we have to communicate with them that, hey, this is what we're looking at. This is the latest on the forecast. So when we're communicating up to Colonel Filchek and the other wing leaders, we're also communicating within our own squadron to the airfield functions as well.
Right, and it's funny because you think in a deployed environment. You see a lot of weather briefings, and I think weather briefings probably before every single flight.
Absolutely.
But I always kind of enjoy when we go to staff meetings and you're there, like we kick off a staff meeting every single time with a weather brief. And it just, for some weird giddy, thing, it always, because I'm no longer in the military, but it always makes me feel like I'm back in and downrange, because it's like the one thing is going to be consistent every time there's a weather brief.
Yeah, so it usually leads off pretty much any wing commanders stand up throughout the Air Force.
Yeah, it's huge.
And Army.
Greatly important. So outside of your squadron, I know you guys work pretty closely with the Weather Service down in Norman. I think we even have some people stationed there full time.
We do have some people there at the. So National Weather Service has a lot of different facets to it. It's especially down in Norman. That's their their main control point, their main headquarters for outside of Washington D.C. Pretty much a lot of their developments down there in Norman.
Right.
Partnered with OU as well, but they have the Radar Operations Center there, which can actually controls all the weather radars throughout CONUS, throughout the U.S. And we do have some Air Force personnel down there at the Radar Operations Center.
So what kind of work do you guys do with them? Do you partner in like studying atmospheric science or patterns or anything?
There's some of that with especially with our some of our development through AFIT, our development advanced degrees. We'll partner with the National Weather Service down there. A lot of the research portion of that, like I said, they partner with OU down there as well.
Right.
So that's kind of the extent of our relationship with them, is a lot of kind of the research and climatology, that sort of thing. I know for Oklahoma, there is actually the National Weather Center, which is OU's Department of Atmospheric Science down there, puts on a symposium every year that kind of deals with emergency management, as well as just kind of lessons learned from some severe weather and winter weather here in Oklahoma.
Right.
And so all of the installations in Oklahoma attend, as well as the emergency managers from those installations, and then National Weather Service actually they attend as well. So it's kind of a nice kind of comparison to see, like, kind of share each other's notes and lessons learned.
The who's who out there.
Absolutely.
So Tinker is pretty massive. I mean, there's more than 30,000 people here on any given day. Everyone from active duty and civilians to their dependents and retirees. And one of the biggest jobs, and arguably most stressful, has to be dealing with weather. Calls that determine base opening, base closure. Do we delay? Do we not delay? Because you affect a lot of people, and of course you affect a lot of money. If
we do.
There's a piece of this installation that has to stop working, I mean that's a lot of dollars and cents that
it is a lot
are
of dollars
stopping.
and cents and time.
How stressful is that for you and your team to be the ones that kind of at the tip of that spear making that call?
It can be pretty stressful, especially this time of year. Everybody always thinks of severe weather with Oklahoma. It's synonymous with Oklahoma, but the winter weather is actually a harder forecast for us, because Oklahoma is usually on that fine line of, if we're going to get, all rain, maybe some rain and some sleet and some ice, or maybe all ice or all snow. So we have to have a really good handle on what we're expecting for that forecast, because as you mentioned, it's a big deal closing down this base, even for one shift,
Right.
one 8-hour shift, that sets a lot of the mission sets here on this base behind big time. And so we want to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure we're not crying wolf too and saying everything every time is going to be the worst thing. So but we have a really good team that can really step back and look at it over the course of several days leading up to an event. Right. And we kind of we communicate early and often too with the leadership, so they're not surprised.
Right, which is good. The leadership doesn't like to be
don't
surprised.
like the surprise. Yes.
So do you
good
guys,
or bad?
Right, exactly. So do you guys take training in thick skin? Because if you call for half inch of ice, and I guess the air temperature stays just above 32, or the ground temperature is too warm, and then you've misdiagnosed the big storm coming, and it seems like weather forecasters are right there at the brunt of all the rotten tomatoes. So.
Absolutely. And everybody always says, that's the best job in the world because you never have to be right. But but here we do, because, there's a lot of, people's, lives on the line,
Right.
with trying to get into work and the mission, making sure that we get ready. But yes, it is, we do have to have thick skin, And we have to have a short memory. It's like baseball. If you strike out 6 times, you can't get up expecting to strike out the 7th time. So we have to just get back in there and try to do, and we learn from it. We, if we do miss a forecast like that, like you described, we do a forecast review where we have lessons learned. We brief that in our monthly station meetings at the weather flight. So it isn't just a complete, brain dump and forget about it, move on. We actually take those lessons learned, like, hey, what actually happened here from what we were thinking, and then what happened and where the differences are.
Which is very good. That's so important to do. And of course, you can't always be right with the weather. There's a lot of factors that come and go out of that. And I think most people in the state of Oklahoma really understand that weather can be very difficult to predict, because on any given day, you guys are all right or all wrong, or off just a little bit. And of course, everybody in weather in this state, including you guys, deal with emergency response because it's critical that there are lives at stake. But one thing that makes it maybe even a little more challenging for you and your team is that not only are you dealing with the lives, but you have billions of dollars of taxpayer money sitting out there on ramps, workloads. There are missions, do we fly? Do we move planes? Do we hangar planes? I mean, there's just a lot of extra that goes into that. But
there is.
So I know people understand weather here. It's one of the most fascinating things. When I first moved to Oklahoma, there was a rainstorm that came up the first night I was here, and the weather stayed into the TV channels for the whole night. And I was really wondering, like, wow, it just seems like a thunderstorm.
You don't see that every time.
No.
Everywhere you go. You don't see every news station having their own, weather helicopters up either, or their whole storm chaser teams.
Right.
It's pretty wild to see.
It's big.
It's robust.
And we go back to the lessons learned thing, and I think this is pretty critical. So a couple of years ago, I'm pretty sure you were here, we had a tornado drop in on one side of the base, literally out of nowhere. Tore up a little bit over there. Fortunately, nobody got hurt. There was a little bit of damage. And then it lifts up, jumps over the highway, goes down into a parking lot of some stores across the highway, tears some of that up. But, like, nobody saw this thing coming. I don't know that it seemed like maybe the weather patterns were not forecasting this. How does that happen, and what do you guys take away from that to learn?
Yeah, that was a really good example of what we call it's got a long name. It's QLCS for short, that system, or squall line. If you hear squall line thrown out, that's what that system was that moved through. So as compared to a supercell tornado, which is what you think of when you think of the two Moore tornadoes or the El Reno tornado a few years ago, those were supercell classic thunderstorm or supercell thunderstorm with a hook echo on the back end. Everybody thinks about that when you're studying weather,
right? But
there's not a lot of studying on the squall line type setup. And you're right, nobody really saw that system coming. Well, we saw the thunderstorms, but the tornadic nature of it, and because we only really had one radar scan of it, and not to get too into the weeds about it, but the radars, we get a new radar scan every, 4 or 5 minutes. And for our forecasting for tornadoes, we have to see, that kind of rotation for 2 scans. And we really only had it for 1. And then, like you said, it picked up and it was gone.
Right.
And the damage was done. And it came as quick as it came, it left. But we did archive all that data, what we did. And we did, like I mentioned, the forecast review. We did one for that case study, and then we actually packaged all that up and sent that down to our schoolhouse, the weather schoolhouse at Keesler, and they were really grateful for it too, because they don't have a lot of radar images saved from like the Moore tornadoes. Everybody, the classic examples everybody thinks of, but not really these squall line type setups. And so they've begun teaching it down there at the schoolhouse, and so we're currently trying to refine our forecasting for those type of tornadoes. And like you said, the National Weather Service also, they weren't picking up on the potential that day, and then we finally did find out that it was probably an EF0, maybe an EF1 as it touched down,
right,
very briefly.
And thankfully, because there was no warning, and so fortunately it wasn't too big. But Is there anything that you guys can look at? I mean, is it just literally impossible to determine looking at a squall line data to say we have a pretty good idea that something like this may happen? I mean, is it too non-focal or?
There is. It's just kind of getting through. Like I said, looking at the radar is a big way of us actually looking for the rotation. So there's a couple products you can look at on radar, but the velocity, which you actually see a lot on television here. A lot of the forecasters are really good on the local news stations here, and they'll show the velocity in that rotation.
Right.
And so we really just have to get into the weeds of it and realize that this isn't going to be a classic setup like we're looking for a supercell in April or May.
Right.
But this is going to be really quick, and we have to react quickly. This may only be one radar image, and at one level that we see that rotation, and we have to jump on it.
Right. Now, from having lived here for quite a long time, I mean, I have been out here for all of the big ones since '99 on, and thankfully, we do have a lot of experts around here that can help out, and you do get to learn a lot, just by watching and listening. But have you been able to study the patterns that set up particular days like that? Like, can you see a squall line pattern like that coming far out, or is that something that kind of develops pretty quickly?
We can usually see that, and we expected it to kind of be kind of linear in nature with those. With those thunderstorms that day, and we know the days when it's going to be more kind of sporadic with supercells developing. You don't know exactly where cells are going to develop on those days, but you know that they're going to be out there somewhere, and we can usually know that a couple days in advance, maybe 48 to 72 hours in advance, and that's when we start communicating that to the leadership, the wing leaders here on base.
Right.
That hey, there's this potential, and then we from then on we're communicating at a minimum every day, sometimes a couple times a day with an updated forecast.
Yeah, see that. So how you hear the terms models a lot, and I don't know if you can get into too many specifics about models and what you guys use to forecast, but how much math on the human side and the model side? I mean, how much is there on either side? Like, which is determining the better? Is it the computer models, or is there ways that you have to determine math and calculations based on what they're saying?
So the computer models actually take it. They have a lot of algorithms for a lot of that math that we learned about in our undergrad studying atmospheric science, and that all those algorithms and all that math goes into it's already accounted for in a lot of these computer models. The problem is that there's an infinite number of things that can change from a model run as it goes out, and if it messes up just one parameter, it keeps making that worse and worse and worse as you go farther out in time. So that's how they get inaccurate as they go on.
Right.
So the real limiting factor there is the computation. The computers that can actually compute these models and these algorithms all that way that far out to make it more accurate.
Right.
What the human interaction is looking at that, realizing how the model is what we call handling, or how it's verifying at the present time, saying, oh, it's a little behind on this feature that I can see on satellite, that a satellite image that's actually a observed image, and I can see, oh, I can adjust my forecast because the model is 2 hours behind moving this feature through. So that's where the human factor really comes into it. So it's not just taking the models at face value, but actually digging into them and saying, are they actually verifying right now? Are they accurate? Or are they just what we call, just out to lunch?
Right.
And then adjusting the forecast accordingly.
Which I think is pretty cool, and because probably a lot of people don't know that. You just hear the models a lot, although the meteorologist is the one taking the tomatoes if the forecast is wrong. But I mean, there's so much more than just looking at this computer that tells you what's going to happen. I mean,
there's always going to be that human interaction to make sure that, like I said, that it's picking up on, sometimes a lot of these features too, Mark, will be really small features that a bigger model, like you hear like the global model or the European, might not pick up on.
Right.
But we have smaller scale models that actually, they don't go out as far time wise, but they can pick up on a lot of the smaller scale features, and because it's actually a grid point, and if there's a feature that's smaller in between grid points, it's not going to pick up on it.
Right.
So yeah, we have to look at different models. We have to look at different types of models, and then look at what's actually happening too. At some point, you have to look outside.
You do have to look out the window. It's pretty cool. So given the challenges of Oklahoma weather, and I think it's pretty famous, but does that make Tinker Air Force Base a highly sought after position like yours?
It does. A lot of weather officers put down wanting to come to Tinker. A lot of weather officers went to OU, and they want to come back home too, and and forecast for Oklahoma.
Right.
But yeah, there's a lot of case studies. Like I said, down in our schoolhouse, we have our radar course that we teach down there, and most of the case studies there are in Oklahoma. So people who want to come here and that are really really devout into weather, and really the weather nerds that we have in our career field really like to come here. I know a lot of people in our flight and past people that have been here storm chase themselves. And
right.
Yeah, so it's definitely a hot ticket that people want to put down for when that comes open on assignment lists. That's
pretty awesome. So how does working here compare to working at other installations you've been? And we also, even the challenges here, like intersecting runways. Like I think we may be one of the few or the only Air Force base that has the intersecting the two runways like that. Do you know from a weather standpoint if that's specifically necessary because of Oklahoma, and how do these challenges differ from the other places you've been?
It always differs no matter what base you go to. There's always going to have to be local effects you have to learn about, and so that just takes time. You got to usually get through 4 seasons whenever you go there, and then sometimes even that's not enough to see like what to expect.
Right.
The intersecting runways is nice for our when we do have crosswind issues. That's been a nice feature to fall back on if we do have a crosswind on one of the runways, that we're able to switch to the other runway. I haven't had that in any other base that we've been able to flex like that and keep the mission going. So it's not as much of crosswinds are no longer as much of a limiting factor as at some bases I've been at, where it's pretty much shuts down everything for that day if you get crosswinds.
Right. And so now you've recently come back from a deployment.
I have.
So you were downrange, and there's a lot of varying weather environments that you'll be in depending on where you go deploy. So what's it like being a weather forecaster downrange in a deployed atmosphere as opposed to being back here at home at Tinker?
It's very different, and like I said, just on the last question, ideally you'd like to have 4 seasons. You don't get that on a 6-month deployment, so you have to hit the ground running for a new part of the world that you've never been to, or if you have been to, you were only there for 6 months before, so you don't know, and it might be a different season.
Right.
And so you also don't have as much of the models, the weather models like we have here on stateside, or radars that we take for granted, the nice stuff we have that all over the U.S. We don't usually have that in less austere environments, so we actually have to rely on a lot of our tactical equipment, our tactical radars, that sort of thing to forecast.
And that's hugely important because some of those areas you in may be or may not be a combat area, so
exactly,
extremely critical to the mission. And so with that, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you coming over and spending time with us
anytime.
today.
I love talking weather.
Yeah, I know. I love talking it with you. I love seeing your briefs at the morning stand-ups. And before we do get out of here, we'd love to extend a special birthday wish to our sound engineer, Jillian Coleman, who recently celebrated not a milestone birthday yet, but certainly one forthcoming. So with that, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Tinker Talks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, and please subscribe and download. Jetstream, I'm sure you're going to be downloading at least this episode. And we would please love to see the feedback. We want to hear what people want us to cover and what you want to hear about. And of course, you can follow us on social media. at Tinker Air Force Base on Facebook and Instagram, and at @team_ on the Twitter. And of course, follow us on our website, www.tinker.af.mil. So until next time, I'm Mark Hybers, your host, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have yourself a great week.